I'm Brianna, 29. 4 years ago, my father fired me from our family's restaurant chain, calling my ideas childish. This Christmas, he announced he was selling the company for 12 mouthers and giving us nothing. My brother screamed. My sister wept. I asked just one question: who's the buyer? When the truth came out, the room froze, until my father slapped me. But this time, I refused to stay silent. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. I grew up in Belmead, which, if you don't know Nashville, is basically where all the rich people live. Think sprawling mansions, perfectly manicured lawns, and the kind of money that buys you privacy and respect in this music city. Our house had 8 bedrooms, a kitchen that looked like something from a cooking show, and gardens that required an actual team to maintain. My grandfather, Thomas Mitchell, started Mitchell's Fine Dining in 1975 with a converted food truck and what he called elevated Southern cuisine. Back then, that was revolutionary. He built it from literally nothing into the kind of restaurant where country music stars would show up unannounced and politicians would hold their victory dinners. When my dad, Robert Mitchell, took over in 1995, he expanded hard. We went from one beloved restaurant to 8 upscale locations across Tennessee. $15 million in annual revenue, over 300 employees. We weren't just successful, we were Nashville restaurant royalty. And my dad never let any of us forget it. There were 3 Mitchell kids. And let me paint you a picture of the family dynamics, because this is important for what comes later. First, there's my older brother James, 32 years old, devastatingly handsome, and absolutely useless at anything requiring actual work. This guy majored in communications, and I'm using that term loosely because he spent most of college partying. Then Dad handed him an executive vice president position the day after graduation. James spent more time at Nashville's country clubs talking about his boat than he did in our restaurants actually learning the business. Then there's my sister Emily, 30 years old and gorgeous in that Instagram perfect way. She leveraged our family name to become a lifestyle influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers who ate up her Southern Belle restaurant heiress content. Emily was actually talented at social media and marketing, but she had zero interest in the unglamorous parts of running restaurants, like food costs, staff management, or the fact that our profit margins were quietly hemorrhaging money. And then there was me, Brianna, 29 years old and the baby of the family, which in Southern family dynamics means your opinions matter about as much as the Christmas decorations. Pretty to look at, but nobody's asking them to run the business. Here's the thing though, I was the only one who actually gave a damn about food. While James was learning to tie boat knots and Emily was perfecting her selfie angles, I was in our restaurant kitchens at 12 years old, watching our head chefs and asking a million questions. I taught myself to cook, studied every cookbook I could get my hands on, and dreamed about the day I could bring my own ideas to the family business. So naturally, I went to the Culinary Institute of America. Graduated summa cum laude, did internships at Michelin-starred restaurants in New York and San Francisco, working 18-hour days for basically nothing because I wanted to learn from the best. I came back to Nashville with a head full of innovative ideas and a heart full of hope. My mom, Catherine, was classic Nashville society wife, all charm and grace on the surface. But when family conflict arose, she'd just pour another glass of wine and pretend everything was fine. She'd occasionally try to stand up for me in the most polite, ineffective way possible. Robert, maybe you should listen to Brianna's ideas, she'd suggest at family dinners. And Dad would give her this look, you know the look, and say, Catherine, please. This is actual business we're discussing. Then he'd turn back to James to continue whatever conversation they were having about golf or politics or literally anything except the restaurants that I understood better than either of them. Every family gathering was the same. Dad and James would dominate the conversation with industry talk, while I sat there silently, even though I knew our food costs were climbing, our customer satisfaction was dropping, and our concept was getting stale. If I tried to contribute, Dad would smile that condescending smile and say something like, "That's sweet, Brianna, but leave the business discussions to the people who understand the real world." The real world. As if 4 years of culinary school and working in James Beard award-winning kitchens wasn't the real world. But the moment that changed everything happened when I was 25. I had spent months developing this comprehensive farm-to-table concept that could have revolutionized our restaurants. This wasn't some trendy idea I'd picked up from a magazine. This was a complete business plan with cost analysis, supplier partnerships with local Tennessee farms, seasonal menu rotations, and projected profit margins that would have blown their minds. Dad finally agreed to let me present to the board. I thought this was it. My chance to finally prove I belonged in this business. I walked into that mahogany-paneled private dining room at our flagship location with my laptop and presentation materials, heart pounding with excitement and nerves. The board members, all Dad's friends and business associates, all men in their 50s and 60s, watched with these polite but distant expressions as I set up. I started with market research showing how farm-to-table dining was exploding across the country. I outlined partnerships I'd already cultivated with Tennessee farms. I presented sample seasonal menus that would showcase the best local produce while reducing our supply chain costs and improving our profit margins. 10 minutes in, Dad checked his watch, sighed loudly, raised his hand to stop me mid-sentence. "I think we've seen enough," he said, with this tight smile that made my stomach drop. "Brianna, sweetheart, this is all very creative, but completely impractical for a serious restaurant enterprise like ours. Our customers want consistency, not experimental farm nonsense that changes every season." He turned to the board with this apologetic shrug. "My daughter recently graduated culinary school and is full of these academic ideas. Now, shall we move on to actual business matters?" I packed up my materials while they chuckled and moved on like I'd never been there. But you want to know what really broke me? That same evening at family dinner, Dad announced that James was being promoted to executive vice president. "James has shown real leadership potential," Dad declared, raising his glass. "He understands that this business is about relationships and tradition, not trendy experiments." James, who had spent the previous month focusing more on his new yacht than on restaurant operations, just smiled and accepted the congratulations like he'd earned it. That night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom surrounded by culinary school certificates and awards that had never impressed the one person whose approval I wanted most, I made a decision that would change everything. I was leaving Nashville. I was leaving the family business. And I was going to build something so successful that even my father couldn't dismiss it. 3 days later, I loaded everything I owned into my Honda and drove to Austin, Texas, with $8,000 in savings and nothing else. My parents thought it was a phase. "She'll be back when she runs out of money," I heard Dad tell Mom during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "Let her get this rebellion out of her system." But it wasn't a rebellion. It was the best decision I ever made. Austin in the early 2010s was this incredible melting pot of food culture. Food trucks weren't just cheap lunch options. They were culinary destinations. The city was exploding with young entrepreneurs, tech workers, and people who appreciated innovative food concepts. I found a studio apartment in a sketchy neighborhood that cost almost my entire monthly budget. I survived on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee, working 18-hour days at entry-level prep cook positions to save every possible dollar for my real goal: buying a food truck. It took me 8 months to save enough for a converted Airstream trailer. Nothing fancy, just a small kitchen on wheels with enough space for me and maybe one assistant. I named it Sage and Smoke and used my middle name, Brianna Marie, instead of Mitchell. I wanted my success or failure to be completely my own, with zero connection to my family's reputation. My concept was elevated Southern fusion cuisine, honoring traditional flavors while incorporating modern techniques I'd learned in those high-end kitchens. My signature dish was deconstructed shrimp and grits, Gulf shrimp, stone-ground grits from a local Texas mill, and a bourbon reduction that took me months to perfect. The first year was brutal. I worked farmers markets on weekends, food festivals during peak season, and slowly built a customer base one plate at a time. Every dollar I made went back into improving the truck, better ingredients, or saving for the next step. But here's what my family didn't understand about me. I wasn't just stubborn, I was strategic. While they saw a food truck as some cute hobby, I was building relationships with local farms, developing supplier networks, and creating systems that could scale. The breakthrough came during my second year when a food writer from Austin Monthly discovered Sage and Smoke during her lunch break. Her review was incredible. Brianna Marie has created something magical, Southern comfort food elevated to art form, with ingredients so fresh you can taste the morning dew. Suddenly, we had lines around the block. Food Network reached out. Local restaurants tried to poach me as their head chef. But I had bigger plans. I used the success of Sage and Smoke to secure a small business loan and open my first brick-and-mortar location, Marie's Kitchen, a 50-seat restaurant in Austin's trendy East Side. The concept was everything I had proposed to my family years earlier: seasonal menus, local partnerships, sustainable practices, and food that honored Southern traditions while pushing culinary boundaries. Within 6 months, we were booked solid 2 weeks in advance. Within a year, Food and Wine named Marie's Kitchen one of the best new restaurants in America. I was nominated for a James Beard Rising Chef Award. But you know what felt even better than the awards? The financial success. By my 4th year in Austin, I had expanded to 3 locations and was generating $8 million in annual revenue. $8 million, more than half of what my father's entire 8-restaurant chain was making. And I was doing it with 3 locations and the exact concept he had called impractical. And here's where the story gets really interesting, because while I was building this empire in Austin, I was also quietly researching what was happening back home in Nashville. Mitchell's Fine Dining was in serious trouble. Under James's leadership, customer satisfaction scores had tanked. Online reviews complained about outdated menus, inconsistent service, and food that felt stuck in the 1990s. The farm-to-table movement that I had tried to bring to our restaurants was now dominating Nashville's food scene, and we were looking increasingly irrelevant. But the financial situation was even worse. Revenue had declined 35% over 2 years. 3 of our 8 locations were operating at a loss. Staff turnover was through the roof. Experienced chefs and servers were jumping ship to competitors that offered better working conditions and more innovative culinary opportunities. Meanwhile, Emily's Instagram marketing was generating lots of likes, but not many actual customers. Turns out, pretty photos of dining rooms don't help when those dining rooms are half empty. So I started developing a plan. Not a revenge plan, a business plan. 6 months before that Christmas dinner, I had my attorneys send an anonymous acquisition proposal through a third-party investment firm. The offer was generous, $12 million for the Mitchell's Fine Dining chain, which was honestly more than its current market value given their declining performance. My father rejected it without even reading the full proposal, probably because it came with conditions about modernizing operations and implementing sustainable practices. You know, all those academic ideas he'd dismissed years earlier. That's when I knew it was time for a different approach. Over the past 18 months, I had been building relationships within Nashville's food scene. I quietly hired away 2 of Mitchell's most talented sous chefs, offering them better positions and creative freedom at Marie's Kitchen. I established partnerships with Tennessee Farms, creating a supply chain that could easily expand to serve 8 restaurant locations. Most importantly, I had developed the financial resources and operational expertise to not just buy Mitchell's Fine Dining, but to transform it into everything it should have been. The plan was elegant. Return home for Christmas. My first visit in 2 years. Let Dad make whatever announcement he was planning, and then reveal that his mysterious buyer was the daughter he had dismissed as a failed food truck owner. I spent the week before Christmas in my corner office overlooking Austin's skyline, finalizing paperwork for what would be the most important deal of my life. My assistant brought me my travel itinerary. "Your private jet is confirmed for December 23rd, she said. "Are you sure you don't want the executive team there for support?" I shook my head. "This is personal. I need to handle it alone." After she left, my phone rang. "Isabella, my best friend since those early farmers market days. Are you really doing this whole family Christmas thing?" she asked. "After everything they put you through?" "I have to be there in person when it happens, Izzy. I need to see his face. Just remember," she said carefully, "you don't need their approval anymore. You've already won." But that's where she was wrong. This wasn't about winning. This was about finally being seen. The flight to Nashville was surreal. For years, I'd flown coach back home, cramming into middle seats and eating stale pretzels. Now I was on a private jet, reviewing acquisition documents for a $12 million deal to buy my own family's company. As we descended toward Nashville's skyline, I felt this strange mix of nostalgia and determination. The city looked exactly the same. The Cumberland River winding through downtown, the stadium, the honky-tonk district where tourists came for authentic country music. But I wasn't the same person who had left with $8,000 and a broken heart. I was returning as the owner of a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire, with the resources and expertise to save my family's failing business. The question was whether they'd let me. The Mitchell family estate looked exactly as it always had. Imposing colonial architecture, perfectly manicured grounds dusted with December snow, and a wreath the size of a small car hanging on the front door. Mom answered before I could knock, practically vibrating with excitement to see me, but her eyes went wide when she took in my appearance. The designer coat, the expensive handbag, the subtle but unmistakable signs of success. "Brianna, darling," she said, hugging me tight. "You look different. Is that a Patek Philippe watch?" "Good to see you, Mom." She ushered me inside, chattering about Christmas preparations and Emily's latest Instagram milestone. The house felt smaller somehow, or maybe I had just gotten used to bigger spaces. "Your father's in his study," Mom said, wringing her hands slightly. "He's been very secretive about some big business deal. Won't tell anyone the details." I smiled, knowing exactly what deal had him so worked up. "I'll say hello before I settle in." Dad's study was exactly as I remembered. Leather furniture, mahogany bookshelves, and framed restaurant reviews spanning 4 decades. I knocked once and walked in without waiting, a small act of defiance that would have terrified my younger self. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face, before settling into his usual mild disinterest. "Brianna, you made it. Flight from Austin, go well?" "Very smooth," I said, deliberately not sitting in the visitor's chair. "I flew private. Saves time when you're running multiple restaurants." Confusion crossed his features. "Private? That must have been expensive." I shrugged. "Business is good." His phone rang before he could ask more questions, and with a quick, "Excuse me, this is important," he turned away to answer. I used the opportunity to glance at the papers on his desk. There it was, correspondence from the investment firm, representing my acquisition offer, with Marie's Hospitality Group letterhead partially visible. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral as he finished his call. "Sorry about that," he said, gathering the papers into a folder. "Big things happening with the company. You wouldn't understand the complexities. Same old dad." "Of course, I'll let you get back to it." I headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which Mom had preserved like a museum. Culinary school certificates and cooking awards still lined the walls, dusty reminders of achievements that had never mattered to the people whose opinion I'd wanted most. I found James in the living room, already drinking bourbon at 3 in the afternoon. He looked exactly the same, just softer around the middle and with slightly bloodshot eyes. Well, the prodigal sister returns," he said, raising his glass. "Still playing with food trucks in Texas? Something like that. How's your little restaurant doing? Making any real money yet?" Before I could answer, Emily burst in with her phone already recording. "Brianna's here, everyone. Family reunion time." She air-kissed my cheeks. "You look expensive, sis. New boyfriend?" "Just working hard." James brought his new girlfriend, Emily stage whispered to her phone. "Amber, she's 24 and teaches yoga." Right on cue, a blonde girl in designer jeans entered. James pulled her close with obvious pride. "Amber, this is my sister Brianna. She runs a restaurant in Austin." "Oh my God, I love Austin," Amber gushed. "What's your restaurant called?" "Marie's Kitchen." Amber's eyes went wide. "Wait, Marie's Kitchen? The one that was on Food Network? With the incredible shrimp and grits?" The room went quiet. I could see the confusion on my family's faces. "You've been there?" I asked. "Are you kidding? It's impossible to get reservations. My instructor took me when we were in Austin for a retreat. The food was incredible." She paused. "You work there?" "I own it." Before anyone could process this, Dad's voice carried from his study, loud and excited. "Yes, absolutely. Tomorrow after Christmas. 12 million is fair market value. And Marie's Hospitality Group has been very accommodating." I excused myself to the kitchen where Maria, our longtime housekeeper, was prepping for tomorrow's dinner. "Miss Brianna," she smiled warmly. "You look well. Success agrees with you." "Thanks, Maria. Your mother wants everything perfect tomorrow. Big day, she says." Your father has news that will change everything. The pre-dinner cocktail hour was torture. Mom fluttered around with forced cheerfulness. Dad checked his phone constantly. James bragged about his yacht. Emily documented everything for her followers. I sipped my wine and observed the family dynamics with new eyes. No longer the hurt daughter seeking validation, but a successful businesswoman about to change everything. Dinner is ready, Mom finally announced. The formal dining room was set with our finest china, crystal, and silver. I was seated at the far end of the table, as far from Dad as possible. James sat at his right hand, Emily to his left, and Mom anchored the opposite end with me beside her. As our staff served course after course, Dad seemed distracted, checking his phone and whispering to Mom. James dominated conversation with stories about clients he'd supposedly impressed. Emily interrupted regularly to share comments from her Instagram followers. After the main course, Dad suddenly tapped his knife against his water glass. The sharp sound cut through the conversation like a blade. I have an announcement, he said, standing with the authority of someone used to commanding rooms. One that affects everyone here. Even Emily lowered her phone. As you know, I've dedicated my life to building Mitchell's Fine Dining into an industry leader. But all good things evolve, and the time has come for change. He paused dramatically. I've decided to sell the company. James choked on his wine. What? Dad, you can't be serious. Dad raised his hand for silence. I've been negotiating for months with a very interested buyer. The deal finalizes tomorrow. Emily gasped theatrically. But what about the Mitchell legacy? My whole brand is built around being a restaurant heiress. That brings me to the second part, Dad continued, his expression becoming stern. The proceeds won't be going to you children as inheritance. Now both James and Emily exploded. That's our birthright, James slammed his fist down, rattling the china. I've given 15 years to this company. Where's the money going? Emily wailed, tears streaming, while she kept her phone angled to capture her most flattering crying angle. Dad waited for quiet. Your mother and I will use part for retirement. The rest goes to establishing the Mitchell Foundation for culinary education for underprivileged youth. This is complete garbage, James stood, face flushed with anger and bourbon. You promised it would be mine someday. You promised all of us. I can't believe this, Emily joined in, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears. You're just giving away our inheritance? That's not fair. Throughout the chaos, I sat perfectly still, taking small, deliberate bites of pecan pie. The sweetness contrasted sharply with the bitter words flying around the table. Mom noticed my calm and gave me a quizzical look. Brianna, she said quietly, cutting through the shouting. You don't seem surprised. The table gradually quieted as everyone turned toward me, suddenly remembering my presence. Actually, I said, setting down my dessert fork with precision. I have just one question. I looked directly at my father, who had resumed his seat. Who's the buyer? Dad's chest puffed with pride, pleased to have important information that we didn't. A very successful restaurant investment firm called Marie's Hospitality Group. They're paying $12 million, which is more than generous given our recent market challenges. I took a sip of water, using the moment to steady myself for what came next. The room felt charged with strange electricity, the moment suspended between past and future. Dad, I said finally, my voice calm and clear, I am Marie's Hospitality Group. The silence that followed was absolute, complete. You could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds as my words sank in. I watched the emotions play across my father's face in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally the first flickers of rage building behind his eyes. James was the first to react, knocking over his wine glass as he stood abruptly. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood, a vivid punctuation to the moment. What the hell are you talking about? He demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of panic and fury. That's impossible. Emily, incredibly, was still live streaming, her hands trembling as she captured what was quickly becoming the most dramatic content her followers had ever seen. Oh my God, she whispered to her phone, her voice hollow with shock. Did my sister just say she owns Marie's Hospitality Group? The company buying our family business? Mom reached for her wine glass with shaking hands, found it empty, and promptly grabbed the bottle instead. I stood slowly, feeling a strange sense of calm after carrying this secret for so long. The weight of hidden truth was finally lifting from my shoulders. "Marie Stone," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Brianna Marie Stone. That's the name I've been using professionally for the past 4 years, while building Marie's hospitality group into a $15 million company." Dad found his voice at last, but it came out as a strangled whisper before building to a roar. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, his face cycling from pale to deep red. "Marie's hospitality group is run by Marie Stone, a respected restaurant investor, not by my daughter who's been playing at food trucks in Texas." The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. Almost. I reached into my purse and removed my business card case, sleek brushed platinum with the Marie's Hospitality Group logo engraved on its surface. I slid a card across the table toward him with deliberate slowness. "Actually, Dad, I am Marie Stone. I founded Marie's Hospitality Group 4 years ago, after you dismissed my business proposal and humiliated me in front of your board." Dad snatched up the card like it was on fire, staring at it as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense to him. His hands were shaking now. "This is some kind of joke," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Marie's Hospitality Group now owns 3 restaurant locations in Austin with $15 million in annual revenue, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We've been featured on Food Network, nominated for a James Beard Award, and named one of the fastest-growing restaurant companies in the Southeast." "You've been spying on our business," James accused, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "That's corporate espionage. That's illegal." "No, James. It's called market research. Everything I learned about Mitchell's Fine Dining came from publicly available financial reports, industry analysis, and completely legal channels." I turned back to Dad, watching his world crumble in real time. "The truth is, Mitchell's Fine Dining has been failing for years. Your technology is outdated. Your management practices are from the last century, and you've lost 35% market share in the past 3 years." "How dare you," Dad began, rising from his chair, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "I tried to help you first, you know. 8 months ago, Marie's Hospitality Group sent an anonymous partnership proposal that would have allowed the Mitchell name to remain on the company, while providing the capital and expertise you desperately needed. You rejected it without even reading past the first page." Dad's eyes widened with recognition, the blood draining from his face as the pieces clicked into place. "The farm-to-table proposal, that was you?" I nodded, watching him realize the full scope of what he'd done. "I wanted to give you a chance to accept help without knowing it came from me. Your pride wouldn't allow it." "So this whole time you've been plotting against your own family?" James shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. "Planning to steal our company, to destroy us?" "Not steal, James. Purchase, legally, for $12 million, which is honestly more than its current market value." I kept my voice level despite the emotional storm brewing inside me. "And let's be clear, this company stopped being our family business the day Dad made it evident that only one child would ever have a meaningful role in it, despite that child's complete lack of qualifications or interest in actually running restaurants." The words hit James like physical blows. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, humiliation, and finally something that looked almost like recognition of his own failures. Emily finally lowered her phone, the reality of the situation apparently sinking through her influencer persona. "So you're going to be our boss now?" she asked in a small, childlike voice that was completely different from her usual confident tone. "Technically, yes," I confirmed, "though the current management structure will be completely reorganized." That's when Dad snapped. He stood so abruptly his chair crashed backward with a sound like thunder. "This deal is off," he declared, his voice cracking with rage and something that might have been desperation. "I will not sell my company to my own daughter as some kind of twisted revenge plot." I shook my head slowly, feeling almost sorry for him. "The contracts are signed, Dad. The board has approved the sale. The press release goes out tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Legally, Marie's Hospitality Group already owns Mitchell's Fine Dining. I'll fight this," he threatened. But there was no conviction behind the words anymore. "My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers have already vetted the deal extensively," I interrupted gently. They advised you it was the best offer you would get in the current market. What exactly will you tell them now? That you're upset because the brilliant CEO you've been negotiating with turns out to be your daughter? The logical trap closed around him like a cage, and I watched him realize there was no way out. Dad's hands began to shake. Whether from rage or shock, I couldn't tell. The carefully composed patriarch facade was cracking, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. You conniving little... He started around the table with surprising speed for a man his age, his face contorted with a fury I'd never seen before. You've been lying to this family for years, deceiving us, spying on our business like some kind of corporate spy. I've been building my own business, Dad, I said, standing to face him but keeping my voice calm. Something you said I could never do. You manipulative. He struggled for words that wouldn't cross lines he'd never crossed before, his whole body trembling with suppressed rage. You think you can humiliate me, make me look like a fool in front of my own children, in front of my own board? I could see years of perceived disrespect, years of feeling challenged by a daughter who wouldn't stay in her place, boiling over into something ugly and uncontrolled. Dad, calm down, I said, my voice steady but my heart starting to race as I saw the wild look in his eyes. This is a legitimate business transaction. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, his voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the dining room walls. You're nothing. You were always nothing. Just some ungrateful child who thought she was smarter than everyone else. The words hung in the air like poison, each one designed to wound. But instead of the crushing blow he intended, they felt almost pathetic, the desperate lashing out of a man who had just lost everything he thought he controlled. And now you think you can waltz back in here with your fancy clothes and your secret company and make me look like some doddering old fool who couldn't see what was right under his nose? The mask was completely off now. This wasn't the controlled, authoritative patriarch anymore. This was a man whose ego had been shattered, whose world had been turned upside down by the child he'd dismissed and ignored for years. Robert moved around the table with surprising speed, his face inches from mine now, trembling with a rage that seemed to consume his entire being. You think you're so clever, don't you? So much smarter than your old man? Well, let me tell you something, little girl. You may have outsmarted me this time, but you'll never be half the business person I am. You'll never have the respect I've earned. You're just a spoiled brat who got lucky with some trendy restaurant concept. I stood my ground, looking directly into his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly, not as the intimidating figure of my childhood, but as a scared, angry man who had just realized he'd underestimated someone he should have supported. You're right, Dad, I said softly, my voice cutting through his fury like a blade. I did outsmart you, and I did it using everything you taught me about business, except I actually listened to what customers wanted instead of assuming I knew better. That's when he lost complete control. The slap came without warning, the sound echoing through the formal dining room like a gunshot. The force of it snapped my head to the side, my dark hair falling across my face, my cheek instantly burning with pain and humiliation. Catherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. Emily's phone clattered to the table as she stared in shock. Even James sat frozen, his mouth hanging open at the line that had just been crossed. But Robert wasn't finished. As I straightened slowly, touching my reddening cheek with fingertips that trembled for the first time all evening, he grabbed my shoulders with both hands. I said you're nothing, he roared, his face twisted with a rage that seemed to consume him completely. And I'll be damned if I let some ungrateful child destroy everything I've built. He shoved me backward with violent force, his years of suppressed frustration and wounded pride erupting into physical action. I stumbled back against the antique china cabinet, the valuable Wedgwood dishes rattling ominously behind me, as the impact sent shockwaves through the glass shelves. Get out, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips, his composure completely shattered. Get out of my house, you're no daughter of mine. You're nothing but a backstabbing corporate snake who... For a moment, just a moment, the composed businesswoman facade cracked. Something raw and deeply hurt flashed across my features as I stood there, hand pressed to my burning cheek, looking at the man who had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The little girl who had once desperately wanted his approval, who had dreamed of working beside him, who had believed that someday he would see her worth. That little girl felt the final death blow to dreams she hadn't even realized she still carried. But then something extraordinary happened. I straightened slowly, deliberately. I brushed my hair back from my face with steady hands. And when I looked at my father again, this man who had just hit his own daughter in a moment of uncontrolled rage, my eyes held something far more dangerous than tears. They held absolute certainty. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly through the shocked silence. Each word was carefully chosen, precisely delivered. "I'm not your daughter anymore. I haven't been for a long time." I reached into my portfolio with hands that barely trembled, pulling out the thick stack of legal documents I'd carried across the country for this moment. "I'm your new boss." The transformation in the room was palpable. The scared little girl was gone, replaced entirely by Marie Stone, CEO, the woman who had built an empire from nothing. "The sale closed this morning," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "My lawyers filed the paperwork at 4 p.m. today. Merry Christmas, Dad. Mitchell's Fine Dining now belongs to Marie's Hospitality Group, which means it belongs to me." I watched the blood drain from his face as the reality hit him. He had just physically assaulted his new boss, his new owner, the person who now controlled everything he had spent his life building. "And since you want to talk about lying and deception, let me share some truths with this family." My voice was ice cold now, each word a surgical strike. "James has been embezzling from the employee tip pool for 8 months. I have bank records, transaction logs, and security footage. Emily's marketing campaigns cost more than they generate in actual revenue. And you, Dad, have been manipulating the books to hide a 35% decline in profits over the past 2 years. Robert's face went from red to ashen as each revelation hit like a physical blow. How could you possibly know? "I've had forensic accountants reviewing your books for 8 months, I said, my voice now carrying the authority I'd spent years building. "Everything you just accused me of, spying on the family business, you're absolutely right. And it was easier than you'd think, because none of you ever bothered to change passwords, update security protocols, or implement basic financial controls." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear Mom's quiet sobbing, the continued ticking of that grandfather clock, and somewhere in the distance, Christmas music playing softly from the kitchen radio, a surreal soundtrack to the complete destruction of our family dynamic. Catherine finally found her voice, standing on shaking legs. "Robert," she whispered, staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. "How could you hit her? She's our daughter, our baby girl." "She stopped being our daughter the day she decided to destroy this family." Robert snarled back, but his bluster was weakening as the full scope of his situation became clear. The man who had built his identity around control and authority had just lost both in the span of 5 minutes. James finally spoke, his voice hollow and defeated. "So you own our restaurants now? Just like that? Everything Dad built? Everything we worked for?" "Just like that," I confirmed, my hand still pressed against my reddening cheek, the handprint clearly visible against my pale skin. "Though I have to say, Dad, physically assaulting your new CEO is probably not the best way to start our working relationship." I let that sink in for a moment, the full implications of what he'd just done, not just as a father, but as a soon-to-be employee. The room fell into stunned silence again, broken only by Catherine's soft sobbing and Emily's shocked whispers to her phone, which she'd picked up again with trembling hands. I gathered my documents with steady hands, straightening my jacket despite the handprint still burning on my cheek. When I spoke again, my voice carried the professional calm that had closed million-dollar deals, but underneath it was steel. "The transition team will be in touch after the holidays," I said, each word carefully measured. "We'll be implementing immediate changes, starting with management structure, financial controls, and workplace policies." I paused at the dining room doorway, looking back at my family. My father still shaking with impotent rage, my mother crying into her napkin, my siblings staring in various states of shock and calculation. "Oh, and Dad," I said, my voice carrying just enough ice to freeze the room. "Marie's Hospitality Group has a zero-tolerance policy for workplace violence. What just happened here? That was your one and only warning. The next time you raise your hand to an employee, any employee, you'll be terminated immediately and banned from all company properties." I let my eyes move around the table, taking in each face. That goes for all of you. We're not just family anymore, we're colleagues, and I expect everyone to act accordingly. The finality in my voice seemed to echo long after I'd left the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked away from the ruins of Christmas dinner and toward whatever came next. As I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I could hear the explosion of voices resume behind me. Accusations, recriminations, desperate planning sessions. But for the first time in my life, their chaos couldn't touch me. I had finally, definitively, won. I retreated to my childhood bedroom as the house descended into complete chaos below. Through the floor, I could hear Dad shouting on the phone to his lawyers, though what he planned to tell them about tonight's events, I couldn't imagine. Mom's placating tones rose and fell like a desperate symphony, occasionally punctuated by James's angry accusations and Emily's dramatic wailing. My old room felt like a time capsule, a museum to the person I used to be. The twin bed with its navy blue comforter, the desk where I had spent countless hours dreaming of the day I could contribute to the family business, the bookshelves lined with culinary textbooks, and the few business magazines I had allowed myself as rare indulgences. Culinary school certificates and academic medals gathered dust on the shelves, achievements that had never impressed the one person whose approval I had sought most. I ran my fingers along the spines of my old journals, pulling one out at random. Inside were detailed business plans, recipe sketches, and notes for the very farm-to-table concept that had eventually become Marie's Kitchen's foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me that everything I had built had begun right here, in the room where I had felt most invisible. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find James, his tie loosened and face flushed with a mixture of anger and alcohol. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the room without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "About what, James? How I ruined your Christmas? Or how you plan to explain the embezzlement to the transition team? You think you're so clever," he hissed, pacing the small space like a caged animal. Little Brianna with her restaurants and her secret identity. Did you enjoy lying to our faces all these years? Watching us make fools of ourselves while you played your little games? "About as much as you enjoyed taking credit for my ideas," I replied evenly. "Remember Easter 3 years ago when I suggested sustainable sourcing during our family strategy session? Dad dismissed it as trendy nonsense, but somehow 6 months later, you presented the exact same concept as your own brilliant strategic vision." James stopped pacing, his expression darkening with the recognition of truth. "I was the one who stayed, Brianna. I was the one who put in the time at the company while you ran off to Texas to prove some point. You put in time, yes, but what did you actually contribute, James? Besides company credit card expenses for strip club client dinners and using your corner office for afternoon naps between your legendary hangovers?" His face contorted with fury and embarrassment. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about, because I've been auditing the company remotely for the past year as part of my due diligence, including the financial records you thought were only accessible from the office server." The color drained from his face. "What are you saying?" $85,000 skimmed from employee tip pools over the past 8 months, James. Phantom consulting fees that went directly to your personal account. I have transaction records, account numbers, and IP logs showing the falsified entries came from your office computer on days when only you were present in the building. He took a threatening step toward me, hands clenched into fists. "You can't prove any of that." "I already have," I said, holding his gaze steadily. "I'm not planning to pursue criminal charges, James. That would hurt the company during the transition, and despite everything, I don't want to destroy you. But don't test me." The threat hung in the air between us, and I watched him process the reality that his sister, the one he'd dismissed and mocked for years, now held his future in her hands. "You manipulative witch," he whispered, the words carrying all his years of frustration and entitlement. "You would actually destroy your own brother." "I would hold accountable a thief who happens to be related to me," I corrected. "There's a difference." We stood in tense silence until he finally turned away, all the fight seeming to drain out of him at once. "This isn't over," he warned, but there was no conviction behind it anymore. "Actually, it is," I said to his retreating back. "You just don't realize it yet." I had barely closed the door when another knock came. This time it was Emily, her makeup freshly touched up despite the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. "So you're like a secret millionaire," she said without preamble, entering my room and immediately sitting on my bed with the casual entitlement I remembered from childhood. "That's actually kind of amazing." I couldn't help but laugh at her rapid emotional pivot. "Is that what you're going with? 5 minutes ago you were crying about losing your restaurant heiress status," she shrugged, examining her manicured nails with studied casualness. "I'm adaptable. It's essential for influencer longevity in today's market." She looked up with sudden calculation in her eyes. "Just think of the content we could create together. My sister, the secret restaurant mogul who saved the family business. My followers would absolutely eat that narrative up." "So you're here to propose a business collaboration?" "More like a mutual arrangement," she said, smoothing her dress with practiced precision. "You need a media presence for your company that humanizes you and tells your story. I need an authentic connection to actual business success, instead of just looking pretty with lifestyle products." The nakedly transactional nature of her proposal was so typically Emily that I almost admired her shamelessness. "And what about actually working for the company, learning the business operations, contributing something beyond your Instagram aesthetic?" She wrinkled her nose in genuine distaste. "God, no. Kitchen work is boring and business meetings make me want to literally die. But I could be like the brand ambassador, the lifestyle face of the company for younger demographics." "The lifestyle face of a restaurant investment company," I repeated slowly. "Do you hear yourself?" Emily stood, straightening her shoulders with renewed confidence. "Fine, mock me like everyone else in this family does. But my social media skills are actually valuable in today's market, whether you respect them or not. I've built my own brand from nothing, just like you did. Maybe our methods are different, but we both created something from our own vision." The parallel had never occurred to me before, and I found myself momentarily speechless. There was a strange kind of truth to it, though our approaches and values diverged dramatically. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But not tonight." She nodded, apparently satisfied with even this small concession. "Just so you know, I've already posted about a major family business development without specifics. The engagement is absolutely through the roof." A gentler knock came after she left. Mom entered, looking surprisingly sober, given the amount of wine she had consumed at dinner. She had changed from her dinner dress into a cashmere sweater and slacks. Her armor of Nashville society wife, temporarily set aside. "Your father has locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch and the company bylaws," she said, settling into the window seat where she used to sit and read me bedtime stories when I was small. "He's convinced there must be some legal loophole to stop the sale." "There isn't," I said simply. "His lawyers already confirmed the deal was airtight." She nodded, looking around the room with eyes that seemed to really see it for the first time in years. "You know, I kept everything exactly as you left it. I always thought you would come back once you got this rebellion out of your system." "It was never a rebellion, Mom. It was a career, a life, a future I built for myself when no one here believed I could." $15 million, she mused, shaking her head slightly. "My little girl built a company worth $15 million in secret, while we all thought you were struggling to make ends meet in some tiny Austin apartment." I turned to face her fully. "You could have asked, Mom. Any of you could have shown genuine interest in what I was doing, how I was surviving, what my dreams actually were. But none of you ever really wanted to know." Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over. "I knew, Brianna. Not the details, not the incredible scale of your success, but I knew you were special. I saw it when you were little, the way your mind worked differently, how you understood things the rest of us couldn't grasp." She wiped at her cheeks with trembling fingers. "I just didn't know how to help you in a family like ours, with a man like your father." "You could have stood up for me," I said, the old hurt rising unexpectedly in my throat. "All those times he dismissed me, humiliated me, made me feel like my ideas didn't matter. You just sat there and let it happen." "I was wrong," she admitted quietly, her voice breaking slightly. "I told myself I was keeping the peace, being a supportive wife, maintaining family harmony. But I failed as a mother when you needed an advocate most." The simple acknowledgement pierced something that had been frozen inside me for years. I had come home prepared for anger, for accusations, even for legal threats. I had not prepared for genuine remorse. What happens now? Mom asked after a long silence filled only with the distant sounds of continued chaos downstairs. Tomorrow morning, the acquisition becomes public knowledge. Mitchell's Fine Dining will become a subsidiary of Marie's Hospitality Group. The restaurant names will remain for now, but operations will be completely restructured. I hesitated, then added, Dad and James will be offered advisory positions with no actual operational authority if they want them, mostly for appearances and continuity during the transition. And you? Will you move back to Nashville permanently? I shook my head. I'll remain based in Austin. We'll install a new management team here with people who understand modern restaurant operations. She nodded, seeming to understand all I wasn't saying. That I had outgrown this house, this family dynamic, this version of myself that had been shaped by their expectations and limitations. Your father may never forgive you for this, she warned softly. I know, I acknowledged. But this isn't about forgiveness, Mom. It's about finally being seen for who I actually am, not who he wanted me to be. After she left, I worked until dawn, preparing for the morning's final confrontation and the press release that would change everything. As the first gray light of December morning filtered through my curtains, I changed into one of my best Armani suits, styled my hair into the sleek chignon that Marie Stone was known for, and put on the subtle but unmistakable makeup of a successful CEO. The morning would bring either a new beginning for the Mitchell family or its final fracturing. Either way, I was ready. 1 year later, I'm standing in the newly renovated headquarters of Mitchell's Fine Dining, now operating as a premier subsidiary of Marie's Hospitality Group. The former Nashville flagship has been completely transformed with open kitchen concepts, sustainable design elements, and the farm-to-table menu that honors our Southern heritage, while embracing the culinary innovation I'd dreamed of for years. My role as CEO means I split my time between Austin and Nashville, overseeing the integration of our restaurant concepts and the evolution of our expanded brand. The transition wasn't easy, but it exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Dad surprised everyone by eventually embracing his advisory role with unexpected grace. Once the initial shock and anger subsided, and after a long conversation about boundaries and mutual respect, he found genuine satisfaction in mentoring younger team members and maintaining relationships with long-standing clients. We established weekly meetings where he offers insights on Nashville's dining scene and industry relationships, and I actually look forward to these sessions now. For the first time in our lives, we're building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than expectations and disappointments. James's situation required more dramatic intervention. After facing irrefutable evidence of his financial misconduct, he initially threatened legal action against both me and the company. Eventually, he realized his options were severely limited and accepted a carefully structured offer: full repayment of stolen funds, immediate resignation from his executive position, and enrollment in a comprehensive hospitality management program if he wanted any future role in the business. To my genuine surprise, he chose education over exile and is now halfway through his first semester, calling occasionally with questions that show he's finally taking business seriously. Emily has absolutely flourished in her new role as brand ambassador for our lifestyle dining division, a small but rapidly growing part of the business that benefits enormously from her social media expertise. Her followers were completely captivated by the dramatic family business saga, which she carefully crafted as a story of female empowerment and family reconciliation, rather than the more complex reality we all lived through. Her Nashville restaurant heiress turned business partner, rebrand has opened doors to younger demographics we'd previously struggled to reach. Mom has perhaps changed the most dramatically. Freed from her exhausting role as peacekeeper in a dysfunctional family business, she reduced her drinking significantly, started volunteering with women's culinary education initiatives, and even joined the board of a restaurant incubator specifically for female entrepreneurs. I want to help other girls like you, she told me recently, so their mothers don't make the same mistakes I did. As I walk through our Nashville location today, employees nod respectfully or smile with genuine warmth. I'm no longer Brianna Mitchell, the forgotten daughter, nor Marie Stone, the mysterious founder. I'm simply Brianna, the CEO who modernized a failing family business and created new opportunities for everyone involved. My assistant interrupts my thoughts. Your father's waiting in the conference room with the quarterly reports, and your mother called to confirm dinner tonight with the potential Memphis expansion investors. I head toward the meeting, pausing briefly at our newly installed company timeline in the main lobby. It displays the complete evolution of Mitchell's fine dining from my grandfather's humble food truck to our current iteration as part of Marie's hospitality group. My photo now hangs alongside those of my grandfather and father. 3 generations of leadership, with my own achievements listed with equal prominence to theirs. Christmas is approaching again, and this year will be entirely different. We've planned a smaller, more intimate family dinner without the performative traditions and underlying tensions that dominated our previous gatherings. No formal gratitude ritual, no business posturing, no power plays. Just a family still learning how to truly see and hear each other. The journey from rejection to leadership has been longer and more emotionally complex than I could have imagined when I left Nashville 4 years ago. With $8,000 and a broken heart, the daily challenges of merging family relationships with business operations continue to require patience and perspective I'm still developing. There have been difficult moments when the weight of past hurts threatened to overwhelm the progress we've made. When old communication patterns emerge during tense meetings or family dinners. The hardest part wasn't the acquisition itself, but the ongoing work of building relationships that could withstand both our complicated shared history and our current professional roles. Dad still occasionally slips into his old authoritarian approach before catching himself. I sometimes find myself unnecessarily defensive, anticipating dismissal that no longer comes. Yet slowly, conversation by conversation, meeting by meeting, the Mitchell family is creating an entirely new dynamic. Mom hosted a dinner last month where, for the first time in my memory, everyone spoke with equal voice, everyone truly listened, and no one stormed out in anger. Small victories, but deeply meaningful ones. Perhaps the most profound moment came unexpectedly during a late night at the office when Dad and I were reviewing the first quarter results after the merger. The numbers had exceeded all projections. Customer satisfaction at an all-time high, revenue up 45%, staff retention at record levels. You know, he said quietly, staring at the spreadsheet with something that might have been wonder. You've already accomplished more in 1 year than I did in my first decade running this company. That simple acknowledgement healed something in me I hadn't even realized was still broken. Not because I needed his professional validation anymore, but because it represented the human recognition I had sought for so long. As I enter the conference room where Dad waits with our quarterly reports, I reflect on how unexpectedly complex this journey has been from that explosive Christmas revelation to today. The lesson I carry forward isn't that success is the best revenge, but that success without reconciliation ultimately leaves both sides impoverished. True victory came not when I proved my father wrong, but when we both found a way to be right together. The experience taught me that building your own empire is incredibly powerful, but using that power to heal rather than harm is what transforms personal success into lasting legacy. The restaurants we now operate together are thriving not just because of better management systems or modern concepts, but because they represent what becomes possible when talent is recognized regardless of its source, when ideas are valued over politics, and when family dynamics are rebuilt on respect rather than tradition. For anyone watching this who recognizes the painful dynamics of family business, who has felt invisible or undervalued by those who should champion you most, I hope my story offers both inspiration and honest caution. Building your own success is absolutely crucial, but healing family wounds requires so much more than professional achievement. It demands brutal honesty, genuine vulnerability, and the courage to offer second chances even when they seem completely undeserved. Have you experienced similar family business challenges that made you question your worth? Drop a comment below and share your story. How did you navigate the complex intersection of family loyalty and professional ambition? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and pursuing your authentic dreams? If this story resonated with something deep in your experience, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that transformation is possible. Sometimes we need to see proof that it's possible to build something extraordinary even when, especially when, the people closest to us refuse to believe in our vision. The Mitchell family restaurants are thriving beyond our wildest expectations. Our team is stronger and more innovative than ever. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just professionally successful, I'm finally, truly home. Not the home I grew up in, where my voice was systematically silenced, but the home I built with my own hands, where everyone's contribution matters and innovation is celebrated rather than dismissed as impractical dreaming. Remember, the true measure of success isn't what you build in isolation, but what you create in relationship with others. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving them wrong about you, but helping everyone involved discover they were wrong about themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, the daughter they underestimated becomes exactly the leader they never knew they desperately needed. Thank you for witnessing this journey from rejection to reconciliation, from invisibility to influence. Now go build something amazing, even if no one believes in you yet. Especially if no one believes in you yet. Your vision matters, your voice deserves to be heard, and your success story is waiting to be written.